What's up, y'all? Today we're doing more practice on dialogue so that we can make sure our stories this week are perfect. All right. So, dialogue and punctuation. This is a review from last week. Want to go over it real quickly. Dialogue, fancy word for saying quotes from characters or people in a story or article. So, whenever a character speaks in your story, that's an example of dialogue. As you know, it always begins and ends with quotation marks and is almost always introduced or ended with a comma. Where does that comma go? This is something we just went over. It comes before the quote. When it comes before the quote, the comma is always outside the quotation marks. After the quote, always inside the quotation marks. If dialogue ends with a comma, the next word is not capitalized unless it's a name. This is something we'll go over in a little bit. Here are 3 examples with justice in the trash can. If you want to look at them, pause the video. If not, we're keeping going. Exceptions. Never put a comma after a question mark or an exclamation point. 2 examples again. This is a review from last week. Dialogue and capitalization. This is something new. This is a problem that I saw with y'all's writing. The first letter of dialogue is always capitalized, even when it comes in the second part of a sentence. For an example, this piece of dialogue, Kevinisha said, "Stop talking, Mr. Balia." The S in stop is capitalized because it is at the beginning of the quotation, coming after the comma. Just like, "Don't you think dust is gross?" asked Billy Joe. The D is capitalized, beginning of the sentence and beginning of the quotation. That first one is the trickier one. Make sure you remember it. If dialogue ends with a comma, though, the next word is not capitalized unless it's a name. And if dialogue ends with a question mark or exclamation point, it's not capitalized either. "Don't you think dust is gross?" she asked. The S in she, lowercase. It's not capitalized because that's not the beginning of a new sentence. That's the end of that sentence with dialogue. Now, formatting dialogue. Formatting, that's just a fancy word for spacing, how dialogue is spaced. Every piece of dialogue, as we talked about in class last week, needs to be on a separate line. This is so that the reader knows that a new person is speaking. Here's an example that'll help you out. Here's a piece of dialogue. "Ring, ring. What do you want?" the shopkeeper asked. "I would like a bag of hawk fries," says Donquel. "Just one," she replied. "Well, I do love hawk fries. Give me 7 bags," he answered. Whoa. It was really hard to keep track of who was speaking in each part of dialogue there. Tough to read. If you look at it, it's difficult to see who's talking. But if you space it out correctly, if you format it correctly, you see that each piece of dialogue is on its own line. When one person is talking, it's on one line. When it switches to the next person, next line. Now it's your turn. You're going to do exactly what I just did with the dialogue that you have on your sheet. Don't skip this slide until you're finished. Go. Great job. Your turn again. Now you're writing your own conversation based on this picture of these 2 people. You need to make sure each person talks at least twice. So the person speaking is going to shift 2 times. Pay attention to formatting, so put each quote on its own line, and pay attention to punctuation and capitalization. This is your crowning achievement for the day. Make sure it's perfect. Don't skip this slide until you're finished. Go. Great job, 6th grade. See you tomorrow.